Howdy, 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 my name is Anachi Sasuke. Welcome back to Let's Read the SCP Foundation Wiki. This episode, we're going to be doing more of the Alpha 9 stuff. And I'm going to say right now, I'm going to skip the All This Wandering episode. I read it by myself to see whether or not it's worth reading it out loud. And not only is the explicit sexual content not the worst thing that happens in this write-up, it's just extremely uncomfortable read for various reasons. So to summarize, it's just Maria going around unretiring agents from Mobile Task Force Omega 7 that survived the universe being rewritten, and they were they had their memories wiped and were given new identities. And this whole write-up is just them getting recommissioned to being agents no matter what they were in the middle of doing. Which includes such things as a person who did not properly get brainwashed spending 9 years being a stripper anyway. Someone who thought they were trans because of how muscular they were. Who had a kid, and they don't say what they do about that. It's just... I'm not reading that one out loud, so we're going to move on to Folly and hope it's not as bad as that was. I was once assigned to SCP-58, Carlisle said. Back then it would rage throughout the day and the walls of the containment cage would bend until they would buckle and break, and new walls would be erected. There was talk of a possible breach, but they could not keep up with the beast indefinitely. There was discussion of terminating it. I was asked to intervene because of work I had done elsewhere. In this instance, I took a direct approach to the creature. What best can sedate it? One who only functions to eviscerate all that it can perceive. So I visited the site where it was held and suggested they offer it a cow. The documentation describes its behavior as feeding, but it is not exact. No, the creature desires only mutilation. We offer the creature a cow, something that is capable of mutilating with no detrimental effect to our staff. We fine-tuned this mechanism over time. At first it was a cow every day. This proved to be too often, the bloodlust of the creature would whip it into a frenzy. Additional cow would only make the creature more destructive. So we make the creature wait. Condition it to expect cow every other day, then every 3. Soon the creature spends its time waiting, knowing the moment will come. We have struck a balance with the creature, an exchange has been made. The creature is now controlled. Shirley Gillespie nodded slowly. The creature could be trained. Carlisle smiled. The creature could be utilized. It is done then. We are set on our path. Carlisle studied the message he received that morning. The results of council votes were secret, known only to those most directly affected. He had been surprised when he received this one, before realizing it would have been strange if he hadn't. It is, Joshua said. He stood in the shadow of Carlisle's office at Site 19, silent but for a few words. The vote concluded last night. You were there? No, that was not part of my assignment. Carlisle raised his eyes. Very well. I assume this to mean that we have a new assignment, then. Joshua nodded. You do not seem overly enthused with the council's decision. Joshua was a blank slate, but Carlisle had learned to read where lines had once been. Is there something bothering you, Joshua? Joshua's eyes cut across the room like a saber. No. The actions of the council are my actions. All that matters is the objective. And yet... I received this notice early in the morning. You do not arrive until the afternoon, and I've never known you to be late. You were not with the council during their vote, yes? You have not informed me of any other assignments, and I believe that I'm your only, so... Where else would you be? Carlisle could feel the heat off of him, even from across the room. I am assigned only to ensure your safety and make sure that you complete your assignment, Joshua said. Even after all these years, do not think I cannot still read you, brother. Carlisle said, his spine tingling as he saw Joshua's eyes tighten. I've known you for too long. Joshua lingered a moment and then was gone. Carlisle examined the paper in his hand for a moment more, and then began to gather his belongings. I don't care for it, Carlisle, Shirley Gillespie said, 1,000 miles away. Her voice crackled through the telephone. It's very poorly understood. Every SCP is poorly understood, Director, Carlisle said, rubbing his temples and attempting to ignore the jolting pain in his back whenever the vehicle he was in struck a hole. That's why they are SCPs. Even still, there's a danger potential here that you may not be ready for. What happens when it isn't what you're expecting it to be? Then I have Joshua. Shirley made a sound in the back of her throat. Right. Trusting the safety of of one of the Foundation's top doctors to some mercenary fool that the Council dug up. Wonderful! Carlisle smiled despite himself. I'm not concerned, Shirley, nor should you be. You remember the time we spoke about 58? I do. Then you will remember what I said then. Even animals can be understood and controlled, but Pan-Hun is no animal. Indeed, it is by all accounts a human being, and human beings are capable of reason and intellect. Carlisle, it leveled a small town. Yes, that's what we are told, but perhaps it's no different than any other humanoid entity, powerful beyond its own control and afraid. Likely to lash out at those things that it does not understand. Who knows what it's capable of? Can you see the potential that might pose for Alpha 9? Fine. I'll forward you all the information I have on the entity, but that's all the help you'll be getting from me today. I better not hear about you dying, Actus, or I will be upset with you. I'll hold you to it. I don't remember what SCP-58 is. I want to have to check after this since there's not a link to it. A plane took Carlisle to Site 23 on the Hudson Bay, and then a ship took him to SCP-1864, or whatever that is. Joshua was already on the docks when he arrived, and escorted Carlisle to a Foundation encampment outside the entrance to the anomaly proper. Director, welcome to SCP-1864. The man who greeted him was in his 50s, with graying hair and a neatly groomed goatee. His jacket identified him as Tom Bradford, Doctor. Dr. Bradford, Carlisle said, extending a hand. Thank you for meeting with me. We have much to discuss. The two entered in a tent that provided a meager reprieve from the storm surging out across the bay. On the wall were various printed readouts and images. Carlisle sought to investigate one, a depth reading something within the anomaly. The result of the test was inconclusive. I don't know what you're doing out here, Director, Bradford said, pouring a cup of coffee. I was unaware they sent site directors to check up on a remote, dangerous skips now. Carlisle smiled. This is not a typical checkup, I am afraid. There's been an incident recently which has expedited the need for such visits, and I just happen to be passing through. He took the coffee as Bradford handed it to him. I do hope I'm not causing a disturbance. What incident was that? Immediate actions. Did I read this already? Explosion on Site 105. Oh, yeah. Okay, they're just talking about that. Not at all. What exactly are you looking to do while you're here? Carlisle handed him an envelope. The Classification Committee is regularly charged with examinations of safe and Euclid-class entities to determine if their classification requires re-evaluation. Bradford squinted at the papers now in his hands. Is there not somebody you could have sent in your place? This seems like an awful lot of trouble for you. The examination was expedited, Carlisle said again, his face unwavering. There really was no time to waste. The other doctor flipped through the pages quickly and then shrugged. Fair enough. My boys will get you in to see it, and they'll get you out. Not sure if this was the best time, though. Dr. Boff has been a little agitated lately. I have no doubt that this will be nothing more than routine, Doctor. A security team carried Carlisle into the depths of the SCP-1864 labyrinth on the back of a transportation vehicle. Joshua had not been with them when they departed, but every so often Carlisle would catch a glimpse of him, barely visible in the darkness, following closely behind them. As they rounded a final corner, the vehicle stopped and Carlisle disembarked. We're going to pull back to the 100-meter point, one of the security agents said. Our orders are to hang back there until we hear from you. If anything happens, start running. Carlisle gave his thanks and made the final length of the journey himself, which put him within a large carved stone chamber. In the center was a pool of dark water, and across from him was what had once been at one point been a human being, but was now SCP-1864-1. Guten Tag, Dr. Boff, Carl said, his accent slipping through the new language like a glove. My name is Dr. Actus. I'm with the Foundation. The face of the hulking, rooted half-human twisted into what might be described as a smile. It slowly ambled across the room towards him, its singular long coiled arm extending as a greeting. It is good to see a fellow scientist again, Dr. Boss said, his words eternally muffled behind his impeded jaw. So often I only see agents with their guns. Rarely do I see researchers anymore. Unfortunate indeed, Carlisle made note of his surroundings, his eyes catching Joshua hidden within a shadow to his left. Perhaps we will make amends for the absence today, Doctor. Boff nodded at his grizzled head. Let us hope. What is it that brings you to me today, Actus? Carlisle motioned towards the pool of water. I was hoping to speak with 1864 too, Dr. Boff. Boff's expression sharpened, his eyes slanting and his hackles raising. Pan-Hun. Yes, Pan-Hun. Carlisle kept one eye on Dr. Boff's arm, which swung idly and dangerously overhead. There's been a change, Doctor. The world is growing more dangerous every day, and our leaders seek to challenge the stage of challenge it. I do not understand. I feel as though there's little of value for you here, for such an endeavor. A task force, Dr. Boff. For some time now, our administrators have been assembling anomalous entities which we could implement against the dangers that threaten our world. I am a member of the group attempting to identify which entities would best suit— Oh, no, Doctor, Boff said, his smile wavering and his eyes growing tight. I understand now, yes, but I must insist that there is nothing that will aid you here. Carlyle sighed. It is the belief of our administrators that 1864 might be intelligent, reasonable, and possibly misunderstood. We've encountered a number of seemingly hostile, anomalous entities who were simply not capable of controlling themselves and meant no harm to others. We believe that a chance to speak with Panhun might reveal its true intentions, and if they're benign, perhaps it would be excited at the chance to leave its prison in order to keep the world safe. And Dr. Boff reared back and away from Carl, his arms slamming against the side walls of the chamber. You think this was a misunderstanding? You wish to make the world safe by releasing Panhun? Not necessarily, no, Carl said, adjusting his glasses. We've become very good at containing dangerous entities, Doctor. If we discover Panhun is truly hostile, then we have ways to manage it. Our goal is to utilize the anomalous traits of 1864 too, if possible, in order to better prepare for something worse. Something worse? You think there's something worse? Dr. Boff roared, his body flailing and writhing against the chamber. Carlyle took a step back to steady himself, carefully looking for an opportunity to get a word in edgewise against the torrent of insults in German that now flowed freely from Boff. Before he could make his case, Joshua appeared beside him. Joshua, Boff said, his body immediately and noticeably growing tense. Carlyle peered into Boff's wild eyes and saw recognition there. Why would Dr. Boff know who Joshua is? You must allow Dr. Actus to see Panhun, Dr. Boff. Joshua's voice was cold and controlled. It is the will of the overseers. Boff hesitated, carefully eyeing Joshua with his distorted gaze. Beads of sweat began to form on his brow, and his eyes shifted frantically between Carlyle and Joshua. Finally, Boff sighed. I will not be able to keep you both safe, Boff said. You won't have to, Joshua replied. Boff nodded, and with a single motion, his long, curled arm began to descend quickly into the pool of water before them. It continued to descend long after Carlyle thought that the pool or Boff's arm would run out, and then longer still. Finally, it stopped and began to pull back out of the pool. With it came a head of black hair and then a body. Panhun looked by all measures to be a normal human child. Asian descent, light skin, no older than 8 or 9 years of age. Carlyle studied the body as Boff laid it on the stone floor, knowing that Boff would not take his hand off of Panhun's neck. There was a moment of silence, and then Panhun opened its eyes. They were dark, and Carlyle was careful to avert his gaze slightly behind his own dark glasses. A wide grin appeared on Panhun's face, and when it spoke with Carlyle's own voice. Hello, Director Actus. My name is Panhun. The words sent a chill through Carlyle's body. Hello, SCP-1864 too? You're familiar with me. I'm familiar with a great many things, Director. Carlyle nodded slowly. Then you are aware of the nature of your containment. Panhun's eyes rolled back in its head, and its neck twisted backwards until it was staring at Dr. Boff. Oh, yes, the pit. Very clever. Dr. Boff has done a wonderful job. He is, after all, at the top of his field. At the sound of his own name, Boff's grip on Panhun tightened slightly. Good. I'm here today because Panhun's head jerked back to face Carlyle and smile undiminished. I know why you're here, Director Jean Carlyle, Actus Site 81, SCP Foundation, son of Anna and Gregory, brother to Jeremiah, and... Its eyes flicked sideways as it trailed off. The pit is dark, but all manner of words echo within it. It is one of those places in the world that sits between and beneath things. Panhun's head jerked... Very well then. I almost read the wrong paragraph. Carlyle said, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. Would you be willing to participate in a preliminary examination to determine the extent of your abilities? Panhun's eyes darted back towards Carlyle, but then rolled sideways to look at Joshua. This one should have told you, I think, the voice hissed. Told you about the dark things in the world and what happens when you pick at them like a scab. Carlyle glanced sideways at Joshua, who, despite being seemingly unmoved, had at some point moved his hand to rest on his weapon. Panhun continued. You were so certain that because you were capable of dragging the Assyrian into the light and making him dance for a short time, that you could do the same with all the toys in your boxes. His wide smile grew wider, and Carlyle could see the corners of his mouth beginning to tear. I think you will find that many of those toys are not as nice as Abel, Doctor. Carlyle grimaced. I take that as your unwillingness to move forward, then? Panhun's eyes locked on Carlyle. You know, we're not so different, Carlyle. Both of us are bound into systems we did not choose to be in, but regardless, ended up here due to our own actions. Both of us have lived longer than any might have expected, given the circumstances. I wonder how you would feel if somebody showed up and asked if you had wanted to play puppet for your overseers. Dr. Boff, Joshua said, his voice a hiss. I believe we're done here. Penhun's face grew still, the smile gone. Oh no! You asked for a demonstration, and you will have it. The growing feeling of discomfort in Carlisle's stomach suddenly erupted into agony. Carlisle collapsed to the ground, screaming. Without a word, Joshua pulled his weapon, but found that his hands had grown over the trigger and were useless. He called out to Boff in German, then the doctor roared in fury. Penhun seemed to grow larger, expanding by way of dozens of long, wet appendages that appeared all over his body. Boff squeezed tight around the creature's neck as it flailed at him, and with a crack, he whipped Penhun into the ceiling with a flick of his massive arm. The sound of the child striking the ceiling rang out like a gunshot, and was followed by the sound of something vile crawling out of Carlisle's stomach. It was humanoid but too fleshy and lacking in facial features. Carlisle opened his eyes and mouth long enough to see it and cry out before collapsing entirely in a pool of his own blood. The creature within him dragged the rest of itself out from the doctor and turned to face Joshua. With Boss swinging Penhun wildly into the walls of the cavern and the creature quickly closing distance, Joshua reached down and began to tear away at the extra flesh over his hands with his teeth. He backed slowly, keeping one eye on the flesh beast and another on his own viscera. He spat the chunks of his hands onto the ground and continued to dig until he felt the sensation of steel on his tongue. Joshua brought the weapon to his face and steadied his aim. The creature raised its arms just as Joshua distended his mouth wide enough to fit around the accessible trigger of the gun. He hesitated for a second, and then two, until he could feel the heat of the creature's body against his own, and then he bit down. A hole opened where the monster's head had been, and Joshua heard the satisfying gurgle of blood and air mixing. A normal man might have found the recoil enough to shatter his teeth and mutilate his jaw, but Joshua was no normal man. He bit down again, and the creature fell to the ground. Joshua lifted his foot and then drove it through the humanoid's torso with a sound like popping a balloon full of paint. He then turned to Dr. Boff, who was losing his struggle with the child in his grasp. Lacerations covered his already twisted form, and Penhun continued to strike and slice the flesh of the doctor, who groaned in pain. Joshua took 2 steps forward, pulled his weapon to his face again, and bit down on the open trigger. Penhun screamed as its torso exploded and its legs fell limp. Joshua took another step forward and fired again, this time splitting the child's face in two. Penhun turned a single working eye towards Joshua and lashed at him with a black fleshy appendage. Joshua caught it with his mouth and lunged backwards, tearing it off and causing Penhun to murmur out in agony. Joshua spat to clear his mouth of gore and shouted at Boff to move Penhun closer. The object complied, and soon the ruptured body of the lonely liar hung before Joshua like a marionette. He studied the writhing creature for a moment and then leaned in to face it directly. There is a hole in this world much darker than the one you've been rotting in, he said, blood dripping from his open mouth, and do not think I am above burying you in it. He saw panic creep into Penhun's eyes. You know the one. The sanctuary of sundered hearts. There will be nothing for you to twist there in the darkness. Boff's eyes glazed over and he began speaking in Penhun's voice. What is it you desire? I don't know what his voice is since he was imitating Carlisle. Joshua, I just imagined it wouldn't really be a child voice. Joshua nodded at Carlisle and Boff. Undo your twisting or I will put another shell in you now, and let you bleed all the way to the door. When you are done, return to your pit and stay there until the stars go out. Penhun's single eye raged with a silent violence but dimmed. The laceration on Boff's body closed and sealed, and Joshua began to hear Carlisle breathing again behind him. He nodded to Boff, who began to lower the child back into the pit of water. As it sunk, Joshua gazed at Penhun and smiled coldly. You're right about there being less kind monsters in the world than Abel, liar, Joshua said, malice creeping into his voice. It's a shame you had to meet one so soon. Penhun glared at him as it slipped below the still surface of the pool and watched him until it disappeared from sight in the darkness of the deep. Hours later, the security team emerged and Carlisle was moved quickly to the infirmary. His eyes, glazed over as they were, opened for a moment to see Joshua staring down at him. Carlisle's body shook as he tried to make words, but he slipped in and out of consciousness, unable to finish. As his old body began to give out and medical personnel swarmed him, Carlisle watched Joshua disappear behind a flap in the tent. He distantly heard the sound of a phone being dialed and Joshua's muted voice again, and Carlisle tried to call out to him. A mask was placed over his face and the world went black. So did Actus just die? Well, we're only 19 minutes in, and even though I can't really breathe through my nose, I just want to see how long back Alley Deals is. Because I'd rather it not be a super short episode if I can avoid it. But like I said, since I skipped the last thing because it was far too messed up for me to want to actually read it out loud. Let's see. It doesn't... Well... It's kind of long. Let's just go for it. Anderson Massey supported a shudder as he stepped through the doorway. On the proper side of the door, it was an elegant Georgian-style panel door with an elegant entablature. On this side, it was plain wood with cracked and faded paint. It was also about 30 degrees colder with a light fog. Right, let's go, he said to the guide, a thick-set man in a much cheaper suit. The guide was one of many specialists employed by Marshall Carter and Dark. No one who worked for the company could ever be described as shabby, but his dark blue coat was a few shades cheaper than Massey's, and his cigar was cheap with obnoxious smoke. The man grunted behind a gray scarf and set out down the alley. It was always an alley in the Shadow Market. There were no main streets, just narrow alleyways winding their way between the brick buildings and boarded-up windows and locked doors that hid whatever it was the minders kept in there. Massey hated the place. It wasn't that it was outside the world he knew. That was part and parcel of working for the company. No, he hated its shabbiness. It was a low-class world designed for lowlifes. He belonged in his office or the boardroom, not trudging down a muddy alley under a dingy twilight with the ever-present smoke hanging in the air with the smell of tobacco and coal. Gentlemen should not trudge anywhere. They should stride with purpose. He stepped in something he couldn't quite see and bit off a curse. Not so quickly, he said, his voice sharp. These streets are a bloody mire, and some of us take care of our appearance. Whatever, the man said from behind the scarf. He had said hardly a dozen words since they'd been introduced. Massey narrowed his eyes. I'd watch my tone if I were you, unless you care to find alternative employment. An innocent phrase outside of the company. Within it, well, no one ever left the company of their own free will, and a person could be employed in so many ways. The man simply grunted. Massey ground his teeth. He would have to arrange something unpleasant. Specialists were useful, but they had to know their place. Occasionally they passed someone else on the way to an errand. Sometimes they were minders in their gray leathers and brass-smoked goggles. Sometimes it was a man from the normal world, shoulders hunched, eyes darting from place to place. Sometimes it was something more exotic, tall and thin, or a short, squat, scaled. Finally, the guide stopped at the entrance to a short, narrow, blind alley. There, he said. Well, thank you very much, Massey said, indignation thickened on his voice. Wait here, don't let me catch you listening in. This is a highly sensitive meeting, and you're not paid to eavesdrop, the man grunted. Massey walked to the end of the alley and waited. Naturally, it started to rain. By the time the droplets of water made it through the smoke and past the leaning rooftops, they were a dingy gray. He shivered and wrapped his coat a little tighter. He wished now that he'd gone with a coat a bit more like the guide. It would need careful laundering, and that was if it was salvageable. Back alley deals weren't supposed to be quite this literal. His guide could be seen only by the faint red pinprick at the end of his cigar. After a few minutes, he realized he wasn't alone. Two minders were waiting for him. Neither turned to look at him, nor did they say a word. They didn't show any discomfort from the rain, though it was hard to tell with their eyes hidden beneath smoked glass lenses. Only their noses and mouths showed that they were human, or at least had human-like mouths and noses. No one he'd spoken with was entirely sure on that point. Massey thought about asking them what they were doing there, but decided it wasn't worth the bother. Finally, after Massey was thoroughly soaked, a handsome-looking man entered the alley. His name was Mr. Fire, though it was pronounced Fira. It's weird. His smile was a touch too shiny, and the suit, much nicer than Massey's, appeared perfectly clean, if a bit damp. He carried a travel case at his side. Anderson, he said. I saw you, 2 months ago? How's the wife? Kid starting softball soon? Massey forced a smile. He never told Fira about his wife or child. They're fine. Thank you for asking. You got here a bit early, Fira said. Should have called. I could have left a bit sooner, saved you a bit of a soaking. Oh, it's no trouble. Besides, I know it's a bit of a hike, Massey said. There was something he'd been briefed on by... that was something he'd been briefed on by another one of the company specialists. He walks everywhere. Everywhere. Cars and planes, trains and armored carriers, all at his disposal and stranger means besides, and he walks. From one end of the world to another, however fast he needs to, arriving just when he intends. Well, what's done is done. Jen's glad you could make it as well, he turned to the minders. You paid, one of them said, shrugging. The shoulders didn't move quite right, Massey thought. The specialist who had brought Massey was moving in closer now. Massey felt a twist of annoyance, but also a bit of comfort. He suddenly felt very exposed with the two minders as well as Mr. Fira there. He wished he'd been a little more polite to the man, but anyone who worked for MC&D was professional enough to get on with the job despite that. And anyway, an executive ranked far above any common thug, no matter how talented. Always pay your creditors when you can, or you'll pay even more when you can't, Fira said. Did you bring it? In response, the miner pulled out a broken pocket watch. Presumably it was a dream or a memory. Massey had been briefed on that. They could take almost any form, from old cassettes to tourist trinkets to worn coins. In Carter's office was a fragment of obsidian, which was supposedly the oldest memory the miners had ever stolen. Fira took it from the miner and showed it to Massey. The jangling of the chain echoed faintly with the man's laughter, and he could make out a smiling face in the shining surface. What is it? Massey asked. His eyes darted to the specialist, who was now hovering behind the smiling man. A memory, Fira said, fresh from the Black Queen's mind. You've had some trouble with her in the past. Not as much as you, Massey said suspiciously. But I already have the information from this memory. It might do you a bit more good. I think it should cover the records we discussed and then some. We didn't discuss any, Massey began. It's a deal, the heavy-set man said. The records from the camp tomorrow and the rest paid later. Massey glanced back at the heavy-set man. He'd hardly said a word on the way in. What was he doing? Glad to hear it. And great to see you out of that chair and back on your feet, Fira said. Tell you what, though. I've grown rather fond of Andy here. Throw him in and we'll call it even. To Massey's growing confusion and horror, the heavy-set man nodded, spat into one massive hand, and held it out. Fira returned the gesture. The heavy-set man made a gesture then, a peculiar one, and Massey felt his legs give way beneath him. His eyelids felt strangely heavy. Delivery will be the usual place, the heavy-set man said, and there better be no tricks for... Tricks? Never! As he started losing consciousness, Massey heard the smiling man laugh. Why would I cheat my good friend Carter? Back in the office, Carter carefully put the memory away. It could be viewed later. For now, the Happy Acres incident needed his attention. Every good company needs to do 3 things to succeed. Handle the money, deal with the customers, and do the work. Marshall dealt with the customers. He would be consoling grieving parents and smoothing ruffled feathers. Carter handled the rest. Let Dark stew in whatever hell he came from. Let Marshall be the smiling face of the corporation. They couldn't do shit without Carter. There was a stack of printouts and folders on his desk. Everything he could gather, steal, and extort from about the Happy Acres incident. That stack of folders had cost him dearly. Field reports from a bent GOC agent. The best information his Serpent's Hand contact could get him. A pet senator who had given him access to the UIU's database in exchange for certain favors. Knowledge was power. So was money. They could be exchanged for each other if he knew how, and Carter was an expert. He spent much of the latter two to gain as much knowledge as he'd found. Much of the latter two to... What the fuck? Now that he had it, it was time to put it to work. He picked up the first folder and began reading. One wall of Carter's office was a corkboard. He didn't trust computers for this kind of work. He liked something he could touch. Over the next few days, it became covered in an increasingly intricate pattern of papers, photographs, pens, colored strings, scrawled notes. One by one, he eliminated the usual suspects. The GOC was otherwise occupied. The insurgency was incapable of operating so openly in the area by reason of blood. He'd have heard about any hand members planning such an attack, and besides, there were no ways nearby. There was one index card left uncrossed when Carter finished his analysis. Foundation. Now, there was an interesting thought. It was rather Byzantine, but the overseers were so enamored of playing games, it took Dark to keep it all straight. They could have. They might have. No. He knew every word that had passed between the overseers for the past 2 weeks. He would have known if they were up to this. A rogue operative? Unlikely. The overseers kept a close eye on their assets. Had done so ever since... Jennifer, Carter said to the woman-shaped thing that manned his desk. Fetch me our reports on the Foundation from... May 2006. September. Yes, Mr. Carter. There was a tinny quality for her voice. He'd have to talk to R&D about that before they announced the line for their customers. The secretary passed him an old dog-eared file that smelled of dust and old paper. He saw the name he was looking for on the first page. Carter put down the file and picked up the phone. His hand didn't shake, but the veins on the back of it stood out, and there was a slight twitch in his left eye. He dialed. Carter! Marshall's voice was as smooth as in his practice as before. I was just talking to the Goldbergs. What can I do for you? Trouble. Oh, it can't be too bad, not with you handling. How bad is it? Dark bad. There was silence on the other end, then... Shit. I need a meeting with the entire board as quickly as possible. Carter said, how quickly can you settle with the families? I can be there first thing in the morning, Marshall said. That'll be fine. No need to contact Dark. Dark would arrive without needing to be asked. Carter rubbed his back where the tubes had been, until recently connected him with... Jenkins? Franklin? No, it had been show. No matter, gone now. Good riddance. Carter put the phone down, picked up the red marker and drew a broad slash through the index card marked Foundation. He picked up an index card and pinned it over that board. He wrote a single word on that card. Bow. After a little more consideration, Carter added a question mark. He hoped he was wrong. He really did. Otherwise, this was going to be very bad for business. So, let's see. Tasers and thermite. You have terrible ideas! Okay, so this one is a long one. And it also has these things. So, I guess this will just be a half-hour episode, because if I read this one, it's probably going to pass the hour mark. Plus, it looks like there's some links in here. Yeah, there's some links in this one. So, episode 61 will start with tasers and thermite. And let's, while I'm thinking about it, let's go see what SCP-58 is. Wrong one. SCP-58, the Heart of Darkness. Oh, it's the thing that's a giant cow heart that talks with a British accent. The first SCP to make my skin crawl. Okay. And they feed it cows. Were they trying to have it help, or were they just talking about the fact that they can have Keter class walking, talking cow hearts that eat cows be used? Okay, so anyway, this has been episode, let me just shrink that back down. It's been episode 59 of Let's Read the SCP Foundation Wiki. If you liked it, a like and subscribe would be groovy. If you didn't, you don't need to do either one of those things. So, thanks for watching, and I will see y'all in the next one. Later.